The sun had barely risen over the still waters of Pine Lake when Thomas stepped out onto the porch of his cabin, coffee in hand. The cabin wasn't just wood and nails to him. It was his sanctuary, a place his late father had built with his own 2 hands nearly 50 years ago. Every inch of the place held memories, fishing trips with his dad, summers teaching his kids to swim, and nights spent telling stories around the fire. But what Thomas didn't know that morning was that peace was about to be shattered by someone who had no business meddling in his life. Across the narrow dirt road, Karen Henderson watched him with narrowed eyes. Karen was the self-appointed queen of the local HOA. She didn't technically have jurisdiction over Thomas's cabinet sat just outside the HOA boundary, but that didn't stop her from acting like she ruled the entire lakeside. Her carefully styled hair, sharp lips, and clipboard in hand had earned her a reputation among the locals as a tyrant. And today, she had her sights set on Thomas. Another violation, Karen muttered under her breath, scribbling something onto her notepad, as if she were a police officer on patrol. She noticed the small fishing boat tied to the dock, the firewood stacked by the porch. Even Thomas's dog, Buddy, trotting happily in the yard, disorderly, unsightly, disruptive. She ticked them off one by one, a smile creeping across her face. But Thomas wasn't about to let anyone tell him what he could or couldn't do on his own land. Later that morning, Thomas was chopping wood when Karen marched up the path, heels clicking against the gravel. "Thomas," she snapped, startling Buddy, who let out a protective bark. "You can't keep that dog off leash. And this," she gestured to the neatly stacked firewood, "is a safety hazard. I'll have to report this." Thomas wiped sweat from his brow and gave her a level stare. "Karen, this is my property. You don't have any authority here." Karen's lips curled into a smirk. "Oh, we'll see about that." For Thomas, it was nothing new. Karen had been harassing him for months, leaving notices on his door, trying to fine him, and spreading rumors to the other cabin owners around the lake. But what happened next would change everything. A week later, Thomas invited his daughter and grandkids up for a weekend at the cabin. The sound of children's laughter filled the air as they splashed in the lake, and for the first time in months, Thomas felt truly at peace. That peace, however, didn't last long. Karen appeared again, this time with her phone held high, recording. "You're disturbing the neighborhood," she yelled. "That many people in one cabin is a violation of community standards." Thomas's daughter, Emily, stepped out onto the porch, anger flashing in her eyes. "Who are you to tell us how? Many family members can visit. This is my dad's cabin," Karen sneered. "The HOA has rules, and if you won't follow them, I'll call the authorities myself." Before Thomas could stop her, Karen had dialed 911. Minutes later, 2 sheriffs. Deputies pulled up. Thomas, frustrated but calm, greeted them. "Officers, this woman keeps harassing me. This is my property, not the HOA's." Karen jumped in, her voice dripping with false concern. "He's violating noise ordinances, over-occupancy codes, and his dog is aggressive. I fear for my safety." Buddy, wagging his tail, licked one of the deputies' hands as if to prove Karen wrong. The deputies exchanged glances. "Sir, can we see proof of ownership?" Thomas retrieved the deed from inside, his father's name still etched on the original paperwork. The deputy nodded. "Looks like this cabin isn't under the HOA. Karen, this doesn't fall under your jurisdiction." But Karen wasn't about to give up. "Well, then I'll file a complaint with the county. This cabin is a blight on our community." The deputies left, clearly unimpressed. But Karen's threat wasn't empty. 2 days later, Thomas received a letter from the county inspector. A complaint had been filed, claiming unsafe structures, illegal occupancy, and improper shoreline use. Thomas felt his chest tighten as he read it. Losing the cabin would mean losing his father's legacy. "She's trying to destroy me," he told Emily over the phone. But Emily wasn't one to sit back. "Then we fight. Dad, you have every document, every permit. Don't let her scare you." Still, Karen's campaign grew worse. She rallied some HOA members, convincing them Thomas's cabin lowered their property values. One evening, Thomas, Came home to find a sign nailed to a tree near his driveway. Unfit property, vacate immediately. Thomas ripped it down, fury in his eyes. That night, as the fire crackled in the hearth, he wondered if the fight was even worth it. But then he remembered his father's words, "This land is ours. Never let anyone take it from you." And that gave him strength. The inspection day arrived. Karen stood smugly with a group of HOA members as the county inspector approached. "This property violates multiple codes," Karen insisted before. The inspector even stepped inside. But as the inspector toured the cabin, checked the shoreline permits, and reviewed the documents Thomas provided, her confidence began to falter. The inspector finally turned to her. "Everything here is up to code. In fact, this cabin has been grandfathered in long before the HOA existed. There are no violations." Karen's face turned beet red. "That can't be right. He's breaking the law. I know it." The inspector shook his head. "The law says otherwise." But Karen wasn't done. The very next week, she arrived with 2 sheriff deputies again. This time, she claimed Thomas was trespassing on community property. Thomas stood frozen on his own porch as one deputy said, "Sir, we've had a complaint. You don't have the right to occupy this cabin." "My family built this place," Thomas said quietly, handing over his deed once again. "This is my home." After reviewing the documents, the deputies looked annoyed. "Ma'am, if you keep filing false reports, you could face charges yourself." Karen's eyes widened, but she covered it with a sneer. "Fine, but this isn't over." For a while, it seemed like things might settle down. But then came the twist no one expected. One evening, while Thomas was walking Buddy along the shoreline, he overheard Karen arguing on the phone. Her words froze him in place. "Listen, if he doesn't leave, we can't close the deal. That land has to be clear before the developer moves in." Thomas's stomach dropped. She wasn't just being petty. Karen was working with a real estate developer who wanted to buy up the lakeside properties. If Thomas refused to sell, the deal would fall apart. That's why she was desperate to drive him out. The realization lit a fire in Thomas's chest. He went straight to Emily and explained what he'd heard. Together, they contacted a lawyer and began digging into county records. What they uncovered was damning. Karen had financial ties to the developer. She stood to make a hefty profit. The deal went through. Armed with evidence, Thomas confronted Karen in front of the HOA board. "You're not protecting this community," he said, holding up the documents. "You're selling it out. You tried to kick me out of my own cabin just to line your pockets." Gasps rippled through the room. Several board members turned on. Karen immediately, demanding answers. Her face crumbled as the truth came out. "You don't understand?" she shrieked. "This development would raise property values. We'd all be rich." "But at what cost?" Thomas shot back. "This lake, these cabins, their history, family, and community. Not everything is about money." Karen was removed from the board that night, disgraced and furious. In the months that followed, peace slowly returned to Pine Lake. Karen kept her distance, nursing her bitterness in silence, while Thomas rebuilt the sense of home she had nearly destroyed. He spent weekends fishing with his grandkids, restoring the old dock and teaching Buddy new tricks. Every so often, he'd look across the water and think of the storm he'd survived. One autumn evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the lake shimmered with gold, Emily sat beside him on the porch. "Dad," she said softly, "you saved this place. Grandpa would be proud." Thomas smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "I didn't just save the cabin," he said. I saved our memories, and no one, not even Karen, can take that away." The fire crackled inside. Buddy curled at his feet, and for the first time in a long time, Thomas truly felt at peace. The cabin still stood, strong as ever, and so did he. Asterisk, this story is just the beginning. There is so much more ahead. Subscribe to the channel to join me on this journey.